Chris Ruppe is a seasoned comedian who brings laughter to diverse audiences across corporate settings, theaters, comedy tours, churches, and charity events. And he is our guest today on the Art of Public Speaking series. And Chris is also a Gardner-Webb University alum.
Waffle House made a decision to put EV charging stations in all of their locations. Did y'all see this? As you can tell, if you're listening to me closely, I was born in a Waffle House, right? And you know what I've never seen in those Waffle Houses? An EV. I'm gonna shoot you straight. There's not many people in a Waffle House who could spell EV. I'm just telling you the truth. Right? Right? They don't need EV charging stations. You know what charging stations they need? Is those ankle bracelet monitoring charging stations what they need. But you know what I've seen outside of those places all the time? Liquor sickles. If you're not from the South, let me help you understand what a liquor sickle is. A liquor sickle is somebody who gets a DUI and then you have to ride a moped everywhere. I have a few suggestions of what I think they should put outside of a Waffle House. Would you like to hear it? Yes. A shower. We all need one of those after we've been in that place, right? A dentist office. Right? Right? Too far? Too far. A confessional booth with a priest. Right? AA meeting? I don't know. Just doing some thinking.
Hello, I tell you, man, I'm so happy to have Chris Ruppe joining us right here for the Art of Public Speaking series as we continue to engage with public speakers in various forms, so many different forms out there. And Chris, thanks for joining us to talk about the power of humor and engaging in that as it relates to public speaking. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, glad to be here, man. Good to see you again.
You as well. So Chris, you and I, we were in college together at Gardner-Webb University just about 2 years ago. And
Yep.
We had some fun then. And I tell you, it's been wonderful to watch your journey and explore how you have engaged in comedy. And I knew you were a pretty funny guy back in college. I always thought I was funnier. But man, you are taking it to another level, man, and I'm loving this.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely loving this. So thanks for talking to us, buddy. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, man, I love it.
So Chris, you grew up as a child of deaf adults, known as CODA. You were surrounded by really this wonderful, unique blend of silence. You had visual language, you had expression. I'd love for you to talk about how that shaped your understanding of communication and what that was like.
Yeah. I mean, in that world, I guess probably the biggest thing that came out of that one is expressiveness. So deaf people in general, obviously, they use their hands, but a part of the language is physical, it's facial expressions. And so just by nature of growing up in that environment, I use a lot of facial expressions, use a lot of hand gestures. Anytime I'm talking, I use my hands a lot and make a lot of funny faces or whatever, not on purpose necessarily, but just, I think that's the biggest part. So when I communicate, I move a lot. I use my hands a lot. I think that's more what came from it. And probably too, just, the insecurities that come with having deaf parents and, getting picked on and stuff for whatever reasons. So most comedians have a lot of insecurities, I'm learning. And so that's what we use humor to offset our insecurities. So I think that's probably a lot of it, as well as that affects how, when I'm on the stage, what I'm doing, my nervousness or whatever, it's all impacted by that experience growing up.
Interesting. That's really fascinating that experience translates into what you're currently doing on stage. Was there a moment for you that you thought, hey man, I think I'd like to do this comedy thing and connect with people in this way? Was there a time that you said, yeah, I think I can do this?
I think there were 2 or 3 things that happened. I don't know if I ever thought I would actually tour and be on a stage doing comedy and getting paid. I think that it always loved humor, always loved being funny, always the class clown. But probably the first experience I had was roasting one of our common friends at their wedding. I was asked to, say something, and I turned it into a full-on roast. And I ended up doing that for 3 or 4 of my friends, and that's always a lot of fun. I'm not gonna lie to you. Destroying somebody publicly in front of their family is a heart, joy, peace thing that I love so much. And so yeah, I think that was the first experience. And I do remember several times when I would watch comedy, always thinking, I would like to do that. I'm a storyteller. I would love to do it that way. Sinbad was, I remember watching one of his first specials. He was on Star Search, one Star Search. And then he had a comedy special that very much sounded a lot like what I've experienced personally in my life growing up. And so I think those are times I thought, man, it'd be cool. And the only thing I ever thought is it's kind of like a bucket list. Maybe one day I'll do like 5 minutes or something. I think that was my thinking.
Well, we have talked in this course about humor, and don't force it. You've got to feel real and authentic within it when you're using it. From your perspective, when you think about humor in public speaking, it does come natural to you. And as you have found a way to use that within the church and communicate with the church and you do it beyond the church as well, but you're very engaged with church communication and humor. Talk a little bit about that and how those things kind of go hand in hand.
Yes, that's probably where I first started using it. I started a church back in like 1997. And in that time, we had a lot of people who were coming that I noticed like didn't have a church background. And so I started thinking through, okay, how would I, if I was new or maybe had some bad experiences in church and I was coming, how do I help them not to be too stressed out? And so I came up with something in my head, the way it worked, and it developed over the years as I figured it out. But what it turned into is what I call the dropping of the arms. So people come in, their arms across. You have that, and maybe more symbolic sometimes, but you come in, kind of apprehensive, like what's going on. So my whole goal was to use the beginning of the message to get them to drop their arms, and we would do some other things throughout the service to help with that. But in my sermon specifically, I would use a technique. And so I write sermons with three buckets, and not just sermons, even when I do speeches and stuff, because sometimes I do a lot of stuff with Adoption World Foster Care where I give speeches. And in those, there's 3 buckets. I come up with my big idea, whatever that is. And in a text, usually the scripture text then sets the big idea up. So here's the one thing that I want to get across. Every big idea should answer some type of problem. And so then I develop a problem statement, and out of that problem statement, I develop an illustration. And I use that to start the message. So, and I use humor to do that. So 90% of the time, I'll tell some story, it'll be funny, and then twist that into, so you see the problem. Well, today we're going to look at XYZ. And then I close the message with next steps. So it's just 3 buckets, what's the big idea? What's the problem? And what do I need to do as a result of it? And so that's where it started. I started using it. It was very effective. Get a lot of people making statements that, just how funny it is. It made them feel so much more comfortable. I'm more relatable, that kind of stuff. So I think that's how it all come together. And then when you put the 2 worlds together at some point, it was always in my mind that I would maybe do like some type of a comedy thing. And so I had an opportunity to do it. And then I just took my experiences from doing that first part and tried to turn it into comedy.
Some of the things you talked about
I don't
there.
know if that answers your question clearly, but
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, because that kind of goes off to one of another thing we talked about is the power of preparation, and you definitely prepare. And yeah, and
yeah,
we've got somebody back here who's really excited about you, and that they're
I can
howling.
tell. I can tell. And
See that?
that's what
Some good
people sound
stuff.
like when I sing typically. A lot of howling goes on.
Yeah. So let's hear you talk about prep and how important that is for what you do. And you've shared some of that, but I'd love for the students to hear that as well.
Well, now in comedy, it's a lot of work. And so, I mean, the prep work is, formulating the ideas and then developing the pattern and the pace of it. And the reality is, Man, I mean, this is where comedy and just regular communication or speeches are a little different, unless you're, some people who communicate and do speeches carry that speech all over the country, so they repeat it. That this principle would still apply there, but it might take me. I've worked now. I just kind of on the backside and finally have a joke where I'm ready to do it on a broader scale, but it's taken me a year to get to this point. So you write it, there's a lot of testing, that doesn't work, this does work, and then you keep editing it and fixing it and adding to it, and then you finally get it to where you say, okay, this is starting to work. And a lot of that is when I do smaller shows or when I'm doing a long show, I might throw a couple of test runs in the middle because you don't know how it's going to go, and then develop it. For my when I preach, the difference is you can get away with so much more when you're communicating, especially if you're preaching or you're doing every, one-offs here or there. Just attempts at humor are fine. They don't have to be perfect. Speeches, the audience typically gives you more grace. And so if you make an attempt to be funny, it's not expected. They're not expecting you to be a comedian. So you actually get bigger laughs. But the preparation side of it is being intentional. And so when you're writing, saying, okay, I'm going to be intentional here. And I'll give you an example of another trick I use when I'm speaking, not doing comedy. When I'm speaking, I also will do a technique where I try to draw people back in. So what happens when you're speaking, a lot of times people start to fade, or you're kind of getting on a long run with something that might be a little bit complex or not interesting, say. And so you might begin to bore or lose the audience. So I do what I call a pullback. There's a lot of different ways. Humor is my greatest technique because I'm comfortable with it. So then you'll just shift all of a sudden, say something funny, point something out obvious in the room. Even like the dog, for example, if a baby cries in the room or something happens or somebody brought a dog to church, that would be hilarious on itself. You just kind of point it out. You just talk about it. The baby gets this better than most of you. Thank you for the amen or whatever. And then it pulls people back in. They weren't paying attention. Now they're back in. I'll use props to do this. Have something that you pick up, hold it up or whatever to pull them back in. And another great trick is just asking questions to the crowd from time to time and literally letting them answer it by raising their hand. It's like, how many of you are married? Show me, it's a pull back. Now they're back in. But humor to me is the easiest for me. And so I do that quite a bit in the middle of it, if that kind of makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And those things you talked about are bridges or connections to audiences. While you're separated when you're either on a platform, a stage, pulpit, whatever, and they're in the audience or they're in the congregation, there is a separation. And we talked a bit about how that communication loop is so important to make sure your message gets across. And when you're doing comedy, that communication loop is in the form of laughter or people dropping their arms or the facial expressions. So that connection's really important. And I think when you think about that bridge, I'd love for you to talk about how that bridge really can work with the audience, especially when there are serious moments. Talk about the bridge in either way you want to talk about it and how that connection works.
You're basically talking about reading the audience, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, yeah, in comedy, it's the most important, one of the most important techniques and tricks. I mean, you get a lot more grace I think if a communicator in an audience standpoint who's communicating a message should use it, and they'll be a better communicator. In a comedy world, if you're not doing it, you're probably not that good, or you're not going to have as good of an experience. It's all about reading the room. For example, I mean, from a smaller thing is, okay, what is the general age range of this group? Even filling out like I was doing a show at Comedy Zone years ago in Charlotte, and the room was kind of divided, but it was predominantly a certain political group, and a comedian kind of went in on that political group. And because he didn't read the room, he lost the room, and it became very antagonistic. It was, and again, a comedy show is not meant to be, I know a lot of comedians do it, but we have a job, and our job is to make people laugh and to make people happy, not to create tension and stress. It kind of defeats the whole point. And so he lost the room, and then, the other comics coming up behind him are trying to fix the room. And so reading the room, as simple as that, is really important. But even as a communicator, if your audience is predominantly older and you're using a lot of really edgy slang words, maybe not a good idea. You want to kind of find that balance in like who's in the room, what's the age group. If they're not receiving what you're saying, how do you pivot? In comedy, that happens a lot if your jokes aren't landing, because one joke could work in one place and not in another. And so you got to have tricks and techniques to how do you get out of that situation? How do you pivot real quick? Because you don't want to lose them for the whole time. So if you see a certain segment of jokes isn't working, then okay, and I don't typically like to do that because my set's pretty tight. I know exactly what I'm going to do almost every time. But if you're seeing, okay, I'm losing them, I might pull a joke that I know works everywhere. Go ahead and pull it up sooner to try to win them back, and then kind of progress. Reading the room is the most important part. And a lot of that, again, going back to even asking questions. One of the easy way to kind of find out who's in the room is just asking questions of the audience at the very beginning. You can do some stuff, whatever the topic is. How many of you guys have traveled across the United States before? Raise your hand, and then you kind of get a feel for who's in the room.
Does that work? Would you give a percentage of time as far as how often that works, as far as that question and helping you and the audience connect? Is it 90%? Is it 80%? What would you say when you think about that?
Anytime I'm headlining and I'm doing like 45 minutes to an hour, always somewhere pretty near the front, we'll start to ask questions and talk to the audience. And for several reasons. One, it lets me know who's in the room. Two, I begin to identify different characters in the room, and I will start labeling people. And so one of the things that I set up is phobias, and talk about different phobias. And then I'll ask people who has phobias, what is their phobia? And then I'll make assumptions about people that are probably not true, but just to give them a label. I had a girl that was acting weird towards her husband, and during that question, so I started acting like they had marital issues, and turned out she's a counselor too. So now I've set this character up for the rest of the show. When I would say something about me and my childhood, now don't start, counseling me over here, lady. I see you over there. It's a fun way to get the audience involved. And I think it works in all communication, because I wouldn't shy from that, probably even in a speech. You just can't, because it's a speech, you got content you're going, but it does help you know the audience. But I would say in comedy, the audience is a big, big part of it. Now, I'm not a huge crowd work. I use the crowd work side, which is us interacting with the crowd, which there's a lot of comedians now that have become famous for that. For me, crowd work does what I said. I still am a big fan of tell jokes, be funny, be a funny person, not just riffing off of what's going on in the room. And for anybody that's interested, it is very rare that a comedian doesn't know what some audience member is going to say. And they do not post they only post after they do so many. They're taking the best things that have happened at shows, not the 50 or 75% of the things that people say every single show. If you ask somebody their name and what they did for a living, you're going to get the same names and the same jobs, and you have jokes pre-written for it. So for me, it's funny because people always think they're so good on their feet. No, they've just done this 150 times a year. You start hearing all the same stuff. And so we write jokes to that, but I don't use it for that purpose. My purpose is to get to know the audience, who's in the room, and develop people that I'm going to use throughout the show if possible. It doesn't always work, because if you don't get some good characters developed, I just kind of bail on it and move on.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, knowing when to move to something else is important. You were talking about the careers. I was at an improv show at one point in Charlotte, and they asked the question, "Hey, throw out a career," and you got the typical things. Hey, a doctor. Throw out a situation. All that stuff. And so I threw out a pickle factory plant worker as the job, and you could just see the faces like, okay, never heard that one before.
Yeah,
and
no, you got their attention.
So they actually went into that one, and then there was a situation that was developed. But I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one that threw them. But for an improv group, they're like, okay, we're going to have some fun with this. We're gonna run with that.
Well,
One of the
improv
things-
is amazing. So, and that's the difference in improv and stand up is Improv, you're looking for that one, that unique one, because it's going to be a lot more fun for you and for the audience, because that's already funny in itself. So you set up a premise they've not even thought of, and now they get to play off of it. Now I have done improv. I was doing improv before I ever did comedy, for fun, never in a big public stage, just here or there with some friends at different places.
Well, when anybody gets a chance to be a part of your audience, they find that within you there is wonderful storytelling, there is honesty, and that blends itself with the humor. So I'd love for you to talk about balancing those and how you do that in your talks and the sets that you create.
Yeah. So for me, I think as a communicator as a whole, one of the things, it's part of my personality, part of the whole issue that I was talking about earlier, the way I grew up and my interactions with people. Authenticity to me is like kind of the number one thing that kind of drives my communication. So, and there's a balance in that, like how far do you go? And it depends on the content. It's not like laying everything bare, but I try to be very transparent about who I am. I use a lot of my own personal stories, good or bad, and put it out there. And I think in communication as a whole, it's the most powerful tool that we have. I think it's one of the weaknesses a lot of times of good communicators that could become great communicators. The gap is how much are they letting the audience in on who they are? And audiences can also pick up real quick, just as all of us. We could pick up pretty quick on who's genuinely authentic and who's kind of playing authentic. And so I think being open and transparent in comedy, it's a little different, but in my communication for my preaching style, very authentic, let people in, tell my stories. I literally try to always make sure that there's at least one detail that I'm letting people in on, or using myself as an illustration at some point, good or bad. Oftentimes I do, typically, because I am such a screw up in life. I feel like it's really easy for me to pick my faults and just kind of put them out there, and and just say, hey, here's who I am. I'm just like you guys, and here's my issue. In comedy, it's a little tricky. All my stories are typically true. The problem you have is, and a good example of this is one of my deaf jokes. I talk about one of the things I say early on. I say, my mom and dad would have friends to come over to the house, and when you get like 9 or 12 friends in the room, the very first thing you notice is it's quiet. Now that is not true at all. You get a bunch of deaf people in a room, it is loud. They make a lot of noises, guttural reactions, they slap hands, or just loud people in general. And they also don't know how to modulate their voices. So when they're talking, it's going to be super loud, but that doesn't set up my joke. I needed it to be quiet because I say it's the first thing you notice when you get them all in the same room is it's quiet. I mean, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, if you weren't deaf. And so I lie to get the joke. And it was on my comedy special, and that's probably one of the biggest reactions that people that are around deaf people are going, well, that's not true at all. And it's like, yeah, but it's not funny unless so sometimes you got to bend the truth in comedy. I would not encourage that if you're doing messages, unless you're doing some type of a comedy thing on the front side. You can allow it to bend a little bit, but not in something like, saying that you're an alcoholic and you've never drank before. That would have been, that's just lying. And there's a big difference. And you could say that me bending the truth in comedy is a lie. I just say it's comedic flexibility is what I do.
It's your artistic license.
Correct. And I
Well,
use it quite often.
You and I have I think everyone has seen public speakers who think they're funny or who try to use humor, and it just doesn't work. But for those people who feel like, okay, I can't be funny, what are some of the tips that you would give them, and how would you approach that question of, okay, how can they be funny or how can they use humor?
Yeah, I'd answer this a few different ways. I think the first thing is kind of knowing yourself. I'm trying to get to a thought process. Some people are not funny and they're not good at humor. And so you can lean into that rather than rather than trying to be a comedian, because some people will do it. But the people who try to tell a joke and they actually think that they're funny, and those are the ones that make it feel awkward. But if you know you're not funny and you're doing, like, there's certain people who communicate and will do a stupid dad joke, and it's not the dad joke then that's funny. It's the person and how they're delivering it that's funny. And so you got to do a little bit of picking on yourself. Like, this is what I do. I'm a dad joke guy. And here's a stupid dad joke. Own the fact that it's stupid. Then that's what becomes funny, not so much the dad joke. And you can make an attempt at humor. I do this a lot, even in my own comedy. And I think anybody can use this trick. If I do a joke and it doesn't land, then I acknowledge the fact that it didn't land. And there's 100 different ways to do it. It's like, okay, that joke didn't work. And just that alone, the crowd laughs. And that was way funnier in my head. My wife laughed at it, or, you can kind of pick on it. Just acknowledging the fact, people then appreciate the fact that, okay, then that becomes the laugh. So I think if you try to tell a joke and it doesn't work to get people to laugh, just always pivot, know who you are, play off yourself. If you have a dry sense of humor, then play off the dry sense of humor. Yeah. And honestly, comedians, the whole job, it takes years and years and years. And I feel like I'm only just now finding my voice, but it takes a long time to find your voice, your comedic voice, and who you are and your personality and your person. And I think it's the same thing for communicators. I think the most powerful thing a communicator can practice and work on is trying to figure out their unique voice rather than trying to mimic another person's voice. And that only comes through practice. But once you know that, then you can play into it, even like what we're talking about. If something doesn't work, you're then playing into the voice that you have to then respond to that circumstance. It really doesn't just get you out of jokes. It kind of saves you all along the way in any type of communication technique. You can kind of deploy your technique. If you feel like you're losing people or whatever, you can bring them back the same way.
As audience members, many times we'll watch a comedian on stage, as we're talking specifically about comedy here, and how it relates to public speaking. And you talk about being able to pivot, being able to adapt, even though you have a script, you know what you're wanting to cover during the set, but you're able to pivot. Talk how stage fright plays into that, because I have seen some people who are unable to pivot. They have their very strict, here's what I'm going to talk about, and if something throws me off, I'm really thrown off. Is that a stage fright thing? Is that a preparation thing? I'd love you talk about how you deal with stage fright as well, or have you ever dealt with stage fright?
It's a great question. I've been communicating long enough. I don't know if I get stage fright. I would say that it's not. I always am nervous, a good kind of nervous, even when I communicate or whatever. And a lot of it, the level of my nervousness and I do have some fright. I mean, when I filmed my special, that was very scary. And we filmed it 2 different times. The first one was, almost sweating, nervous to the worst case. Then the second time you're kind of balanced on the second show. But I would say that it depends on who's in the audience, how big the level of the audience is. So if it's a certain group of people, like I go into certain rooms, I've done a show, I've done a couple of different shows at some rooms that are like really dark rooms and have some really difficult people in the room. I don't know the right way to say it. People that I am a little uncomfortable with, who I am and me walking up on the stage that they're not going to. So I get very nervous about that. How am I going to win them over? And you got to do it quick. And so those times I get nervous, and I don't think in comedy, there are guys who are like punch, 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 but man, you're not going to make it in comedy if you're not able to deal with those pressures and when something's happening and pivot and get off a script a little bit, and deal with it. You have to learn certain phrases and things that you do. And speaking is different. A pastor friend of mine, he memorizes his word for word, but he memorizes all of the slangs and everything. So when he writes it the way he communicates, which I think's the most incredible thing I've ever seen. But he's also able to pivot. I mean, he's a pro. He's been doing it for years now. You kind of get used to it, and okay, I got to deal with something in the room, and they know how to get right back on it. He has enough notes in front of him that he can go and look down and then pick back up and then get back into his rhythm of what he memorized. I could never do that. And I would say speeches and comedy are two different things for me, which is strange. Speeches, like you had mentioned, it's more bullet points and notes, so you come up with your plan. Now you may initially, some people do, and I do this more than I used to do it, because we have a team of people that look over the messages at the church and we give feedback and help each other be better. So I put more now in, so I'll write out significantly what I'm going to say, but when I go, I just need my bullet points highlighted, and I can go through each point knowing what I was going to say about that and do it more freelance. But a joke is written, even the words, every word is very specific a lot of times, like the last word, the thing that gets the punch. Sometimes I'll work on 10, 12 different words trying to find the one that works best. So that it's really, really weird, because I'm a very much a free flow kind of guy. But in the comedy world, it's almost word for word. The joke is written. If you hear it, it's the same every time, because we kind of know where the punch and the angles are. So that was a big shift for me. And initially it was probably my greatest weakness when I was trying to do comedy. It takes years to really figure it out, because I'm still trying to do jokes where what I call the talky talk. Comedians that, will do a lot of talky talk and then punchline. Well, the talky talk is not enough laughs. And me getting rid of all of the words, and it sounds so crazy, but what is useless words that I want to give more context to it. You got to get rid of that, where you're just saying it and then bang, then you got the punch. And that to me has been the most difficult part of comedy, especially as a storyteller, because the details to me, I feel like are important to the story. But in comedy, it's not about the details, it's about the laugh. And so I still want to tell the story, but how do I tell the story where it's about the laugh and not the story? I know that sounds crazy, but we don't get paid to tell stories. We get paid to make people laugh, unfortunately. Now
Well,
there's storytellers out there, so I don't want to. I mean, there's some of the greats, but that's what they did. They were storytellers, not comedians, and they would tell you that they were humorists, I think is the word they use.
but the stories themselves have to have something worthwhile in it to connect with people, because people are drawn to story.
Yes.
And I think it's also how you tell it. And you were talking about writing, making sure the words matter, making sure the words count, but it's also the inflection. It's also
Yes.
the pauses. It's the body language. It's all of those things that kind of go hand in hand. Correct?
And I think that's in speeches and in comedy. That doesn't change at all. There's times like, you want to gear it up, trying to create excitement in both worlds. And then there's sometimes you want to pull it back, and in both worlds too, what we call the dramatic pause, and having that moment where sometimes you just got to stop and just let it sit there. Now, and to me, and doing speeches and communication and preaching, unbelievably easy. I love it. It's the greatest. In comedy, it is the scariest, because that quiet is your greatest enemy in comedy. But if you do it right, it also creates the biggest laughs and whatever. So, and in expressions, I'm jealous of a lot of guys, because I think about like people like Kevin Hart and Sebastian Maniscalco. These guys both are they had a lot of physical, they got a lot of even their accents and how they speak. So my big change, I would say, learning my voice over the last 2 or 3 years has been trying to ramp up. And I kind of noticed it when when I go out west and go up north, I noticed people mention my accent more. So I turned my accent up and really lean into my southern drawl. And because I feel like if they can cheat and use their cool accents and their cool physical stuff, then I got to do the same thing. I don't have many superpowers, so and not that it helps that much, but it's what I started doing, and it does. And when I'm out west or up north, whatever, the accent, people still think Southerners are stupid, so you just kind of play into it, and we probably are. I don't know, maybe I don't want to think that, but
Something you'd mentioned earlier, I want to follow up on. You talked about winning the room, and I want to know from your standpoint, what does that moment feel like for you when you know, okay, I've won the room, I've connected, I've got the audience in the palm of my hands.
Yeah, and this is the part that's a little embarrassing. This is very unspiritual, but I remember when I got into comedy, one of the guys I got to come do a show, and I did it for a fundraiser. And so, and I told the guy, hey, I'm going to do some time at this fundraiser, but I need somebody who's actually a comedian. I'm just going to be a gag to get people to come. And he told me to go to some practice shows and go with him down to Columbia, and there was what they call open mics. And so I went and did that, didn't do well. But at the first show, when it was over, and it's a packed house, it went really, really well. And again, people kind of knew me, but it did go well. But the first thing he said to me when we off the stage was, he said, "Did you feel that?" I said, "Oh yeah, I felt it." And he goes, "You'll be chasing that now the rest of your life." And so this is the sad part and the scary part that fortunately I know it, and I try to make sure I don't let it control me. But I will call my wife many times after a show. Because there's sometimes there's really difficult rooms. And so then it's okay, I'm nervous. How am I going to win the room? It's a difficult environment. And then to me, it's like, I got to win the room. And so you go in and then you win them. And they're coming up to you, talking to you afterwards. That was the best ever. That feeling is, man, I hate to say it, but it's like a drug. I mean, I don't know any other word to say it. You are wanting that feeling over and over again. And again, like I said, it doesn't sound very spiritual, and it's not. I'm aware of it, but it is amazing. And I'll say on the positive side of that, though, making people laugh is the greatest gift that you can give to people. I mean, especially today, there's just so much division. There's so much going on. The thing I love most that I get to do is when I go somewhere, I don't divide the room. I bring the room together, and at our differences and at silly little things, we all laugh and we can agree that, hey, this is funny. Even if we don't agree with the idea or whatever, it's a little insulting, but that's funny. And we laugh together a little bit. And so to me, on the positive side, that's what drives me. On the negative, but yet still, it's pretty amazing. Is when you do big shows, big audiences, big arenas, and getting laughter, and it's loud, man. There's literally, I mean, for me, there's nothing like it. I'm being transparent here. This is my moment of authenticity right here that I'm a little bit embarrassed about, but I'm being honest.
No, I love it. I love it. I think it's important. I mean, and I think that anytime you can get somebody to laugh, there is a healthy benefit for that as well, and it's contagious. And being able to do that within a faith environment, I think, is so valuable because we've all seen churches. We've either been to churches or we've seen them profiled on television or movies where there is no laughter. There is no laughter whatsoever. And for you, I know that faith is important to you, and the way that you interact with audiences, that faith is part of it. And do you have specific ways that you decide you're going to intersect that Christian faith with the stories you're wanting to tell and the message that you want to share with an audience?
Yeah, and I think that, again, I feel like it sounds stupid, but I've been doing it for about 9 years, and it takes a long time to figure your voice. I think for the first like 4 or 5 years, I'm still just trying to figure out who I am, what I'm doing. And so my comedy on the stage is more just trying to figure out how to do comedy. But it was more relationship driven, because a hard room to go into is comedy clubs and stuff. But I don't know why I still like it. I don't get to do it as often as I like, but I try to do it 4 or 5 times a year. And so my faith in that situation is hanging out with people who maybe have a negative connotation of pastors or churches, because people figure out pretty quick who I am. And then there's that, okay, what's he going to be like? Because they may be very dirty or whatever. Is he going to judge me? I've had several interactions where they're like, oh man, you're my opener. You're a pastor. Man, I'm pretty dirty. And I'm like, dude, you do you. You don't worry about me. So I'd say in the early days, it was more the interaction with the people. Then in the latter few years, I've been saying, okay, now how do I use this platform for a message? So I'm developing a tour right now. The next tour that I do is going to be like a date night tour. And so kind of focusing on how do we date better and date well, both as pre-marriage, post-marriage, even later in marriage. And so a lot of comedy around dating in a funny way and different weird things. But then I want to give a tool out. And so that's kind of how I'm starting to shift it to help marriages, improve marriages by, hey, let me give you free dates. You don't have to plan it. Just use this, do exactly what it says, and date better. Give them some tools on how to build a date night that, 3 simple things that you can do. And here's a great date night. So you don't have to be smart. You don't have to be creative. Just do this. So I'm trying to find out how to utilize it in a good way, in a positive way. And that date night can be done anywhere. It's not necessarily quote unquote a spiritual thing, although it comes out of a place that I feel like marriage is important and sacred. And so let's do this better, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. As you think about the material you're going to be developing, you talked about some of that. Are there ever things that you absolutely say, okay, these are the things that I won't do or that I don't do to try to make people laugh? And are there some tips that maybe you could share with others that they could benefit from relating to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do not do politics, and I'll even say that from both a speech side and preacher side, and that I know that may not be popular with a lot of people of faith who have believe that the church should have a political bent, but I personally just don't do that. And I feel like if you get people to engage their faith, then their faith will influence their decisions. And so that is a big no-no and in the room or whatever. And if I do it, it's like there's a twist. It's not going to be. It may sound like I sometimes will fake like I'm going somewhere, and then it has nothing to do with that. Just it's that the right turn off the thing. I would say that's a big one. Obviously, I don't do anything that's dirty. I think that makes sense. I'm just not a dirty comic. I don't cuss or anything like that. I have to find a balance because, and I'll say this is another important piece in communication is self-deprecation, and being honest and transparent, but also pointing out your faults rather than other people's faults. That took me a while to figure out. In comedy, it's really, really important unless you have a character or something. But early on, when I first started doing comedy, I would just tell stuff about my parents or tell stuff about deaf people in general. And that didn't go over well because it felt like I was punching down on my parents or on deaf people. So I had to re-shift all the jokes back to making it about me. And I usually in the first 5 minutes of me being on stage or maybe 2 minutes, I'm trying to say something negative about myself or point out something that's obvious about me or say something about me. And then I try to use that as a pattern. So rather than punching down, it's not easy. I've got a joke that feels like I'm punching down on my wife, and I guess it kind of is. And it's newer, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So even in that one, the joke's really good. I never would do it early. I'm kind of doing it middle to late where people kind of know me. But I'm even on that one. I'm still trying to figure out. I got to be careful because because people then will start to feel for my wife and start to want to protect her and not like me. So it is a delicate balance in comedy. And then you got to take advantage of the few moments you have and then just make fun of it. Like, yeah, okay, I said that about them. But I would say in general, punching down on people is something I try to avoid in general, unless it's just very, very playful and silly. In communication, in speeches and stuff, I would say way more important that we have to be super careful about that. Although I don't know how much we do that. Although I think pastors do tend to spend more time preaching what they're against rather than what they're for. And I think when you do that, if you preach what you're for, it should influence what the things that you're trying to work against, I guess. I don't know how to say that right, but so I'd say the same principle applies. I think positivity, even in a message about truth that sometimes is difficult, if you say it in a way that is positive or not punching down, people receive it better and hopefully will apply it better, I think. And again, all of these principles, they're all general rules that sometimes you might break a little bit, but the few things that I'd never break, and no dirtiness and no politics and try not to divide the room if you can help it. That's important in all aspects.
Chris Ruppe, this has been awesome, buddy. It's so good to see you. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and share humor, public speaking, but also so many other topics that we've covered or will be covering over the course of this semester as it relates to audience awareness, preparation, being able to adapt, script versus outline. So many of these things are incredibly important. I just appreciate you taking the time to do that. And I want to give you the final word. Any final thoughts or comments you want to make sure you share that you think would benefit public speakers out there, whether they're seasoned or whether they're just trying to get their feet planted on stage?
Yeah, I would say for me, one of the biggest things is authenticity, and it will I think that's kind of been a common thing for me my whole life. And there's two pieces to that. One, what is your motivation and reason for what you do? If it is just a job or you're falling kind of into a loop, people sense that. And I think we all have been around communicators who feel like don't have their heart in it. They're just checking a box. And I don't think that's good for you. And I certainly don't think it's good for the people that are there. And then the second side of that is then if you are going to communicate, be open and transparent about who you are, use who you are in the midst of it. And hopefully it'll help you to explore more about who you are, what your baggage is, your insecurities, your baggage from your childhood or whatever that influences both your communication and the way you live. I think to me, that's, as a communicator, that seems to be probably the most important. Remember what your job is. Your job is to get the attention of people, communicate some type of message to them. And if you're not doing that, then how do you shift it and do better?
Chris, appreciate it so much, bud. If people wanted to follow your work and check you out live sometime, what's the best way they can find you?
Yeah, my social media is the best way. I do have a website, chrisruppe.com, but my social media is Chris Ruppe Comedy, and that's both Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And so, but I do try to post and keep up stuff on Facebook and Instagram.
Thanks, man. So good to see you.
Hey, man, you too. Appreciate the time.
So most of my life, I've been a pastor. After some of the things I just said, some of you are going to question that. I get it. Totally get it. I question it. And here's the thing, one of the things that happens when you're a pastor is people will come up to you and they'll ask you for prayer requests, which is no big deal. I mean, it happens all the time. And I feel good about that. But I'm going to be honest with you. There are some things I'm just not going to pray for. Didn't this guy come up to me and he's like, hey, pastor, would you pray for me that I win the lottery this Friday night? And in my head, I'm like, nah, I can't do that. I'm praying I'll win the lottery on Friday night. That's what I'm praying for. Several years ago, I had this guy come up to me, and he was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, and he was going to do his first MMA fight. And he's like, hey, pastor, I got my first fight. It's going to be up in Charlotte. Would you just pray that me and a lot of my teammates and stuff, that, just pray that nobody gets hurt? And in my head, I'm like, nah, I can't do that. I'm going to that fight. Pray somebody gets knocked out. That's what I'm praying for. Somebody goes down. I had this guy come up to me one time, and he was like, hey, pastor, I want you to pray for me. I think I have an opportunity. It's my dream job, and it's across country. We're going to move, and I'm super excited about it. Just pray that the Lord would open up the doors for me to be able to go and do my dream job. And in my head, I'm like, nah, I can't do that. You're one of the biggest givers in this church. I'm praying the Lord keeps you right here. What I think is you need a new dream. That's what I'm saying. Lord, provide him something within 5-mile radius of this church right here. I'm praying.